Hello, welcome to episode 2 of René Me. Hope you enjoy it.
René Me by George East. Read by Eugene Fraser.
Arriving from a visit to friends in the south, we find a new member for our Ditch of the Month club. It rains frequently in Cotentin, and the sensibly deep channels on each side of every road and lane lie in wait for unwary drivers, like still and patient lions at a waterhole. Curiously, it is invariably the locals who play the part of doomed gazelles. Visitors soon learn to keep clear of the treacherously soft verges, while the Cotentinese seem always proud of the way their clinging embrace claims so many victims. Investigation of the van occupying the ditch outside Le Pouce reveals that our new club member is Mr. Jean, a local farmer. He follows the Cotentinese tradition of being close to the earth and is somewhat wider than tall. His hands are about the same size as the blade of my wife's trenching spade. His moustache almost as luxuriant as Big Freddo's, and, on a good day, he looks like his favourite breakfast dish is live rats. He is, however, a gentle and considerate man who raises thoroughbred horses at his farm a mile away from Le Pouce, which makes him one of our closest neighbours. The latest victim of the ravine outside our farmhouse, he presently lies slumped motionless behind the wheel of his Renault, and we fear he is injured. Closer examination of the empty lemonade bottle in his lap reveals, however, that he is merely paralytic. With no little effort, we ease his giant bulk from behind the wheel and help him into the kitchen. Here, his story unfolds over several mugs of coffee brewed to local taste. As they say, the perfect composition is as black as night, as sweet as young nun, and as thick as a bull's most important appendage. The present condition and position of Mr. Jean's van is, he explains with a shrug of his massive shoulders, entirely the responsibility of the ridiculous laws appertaining to the transport of the region's favourite beverage. It is simply because he is such a law-abiding citizen that things have come to this pretty pass. At this point, it's perhaps useful to attempt an explanation of the complex relationship between Norman country folk, the apple, what they do with it, and the importance it plays in their everyday lives. As with Somerset, the soil and climatic conditions found in the northwestern region of France particularly favour the growth of small, sweet, and often exceptionally ugly apples. I have never seen a Norman actually eat one fresh from a tree, but they know more ways to preserve, cook, or distill its essence for consumption than there are days in a leap year. By tradition, every country dweller will have at least one apple tree in his garden or access to someone else's. The harvest will be taken in October, either during the day or night, depending upon who it officially belongs to, and the apples left in a pile in the open air to mature, or, as we might say, to rot. Over the long winter months, the ancient rituals will then begin in conditions of almost obsessive secrecy and security. The basic ingredients for cider are apples and more apples, but most households in our region will make some small addition at a vital stage to ensure unique flavour and taste. Pieces of dead animal are much favoured for the creation of further zest and body, and one elderly brewer of our acquaintance is alleged to add a pinch of gunpowder to every litre to increase its purgative qualities. Unquestionably, the acme of the regional homebrewer's art is Calvados, named for another department, but, according to our village, hijacked after its invention by the Cotentinese. This fierce distillation of cider is loosely described, by those who have never tried it, as a sort of apple brandy. All patriotic Normans, however, place Calva somewhere higher up in the league table of great French beverages, and local conviction claims it to be the prototype of the mythical elixir of life which foreign alchemists have been trying to create since the dawn of time. As every Norman knows, a tot of classic Calva will cure a host of maladies, preserve life when all other practices of modern medical science have failed, and start the most reluctant of tractors on a frosty morning. According to local tradition, regular consumption also negates the need for dental hygiene, and the purchase ratio of toothpaste and brushes in Cotentin is, it is proudly claimed, the lowest in France. An attempt to control the production and circulation of farm calver and placate the region's licensed vendors is enshrined in a law permitting each amateur grower to employ the services of a travelling still once a year. Then the golden essence of the season's harvest will be created and reverently transferred to oaken barrels, where it will hibernate contentedly away from the light of day for up to a decade. A considerable amount will never reach the barrel stage, however, as a sample must be bottled for immediate assessment, possible trading, and to start the tractor when all else fails. Officially, the amount produced by each orchard owner is regulated by the number of trees and their yield, and be strictly for home consumption. Given the going rate for illicit calver, it's hardly surprising that there's a permanent shortage of empty bottles in our neck of the woods, and that manufacture takes place on a considerable scale in the most unlikely places. Many properties in our area have security systems worth more than the outhouses they protect, and we know of a local man who somehow produces 3,000-litre bottles of gout a year while living in a bedsitter. To stem the annual torrent of bootlegging activity, there's also a law which could only abide in France. A sealed and full bottle of calva in a car could be in transit for illegal sale, reason the authorities, so a suitable statute would have to be framed and enforced to prohibit the practice. With supreme Gallic logic, the legislators decreed that only the transport of unsealed and part-filled bottles of homemade calva should be permissible. Consequently, anyone found driving a car with an unopened bottle in the boot risks investigation and prosecution. If the bottle is loosely corked, half empty, and rolling about in the front seat, the driver is obviously complying with state requirements and using it for personal consumption only, so is in the clear. After a reviving gout from our emergency supply, Mr. Jean recovers enough to tell us his story. Hearing from Rene of our imminent arrival from the ungodly south, he had selected a bottle of his best homebrew Calvados to welcome us back in traditional fashion. Before departure, he had broken the seal and poured a little of the golden liquid safely away into a jug to conform with the law. Obviously, it would have been unthinkable to have done so without ensuring that all had gone well, since the contents of the bottle had last breathed the evening air. In all modesty, he assured us, it was close to perfection. To be doubly sure, he had tried another glass before setting out, and even stopped off at a convenient point on the mile-long journey to check that his precious cargo was travelling well. Somehow, and most probably due to a fault in the steering, he had eventually found himself in the ditch outside Le Pouce, and kept his spirits up while awaiting our arrival with the remains of the gift bottle. Now we must help him out of the ditch, but much more importantly, out of trouble with Madame Jeanne. Would it be possible, he pleads, for us to go to his farm and find Henri the labourer, explain the situation, and return with the necessary equipment to rescue the car? If he were to return on foot, Madame would ask all sorts of awkward questions, and the implications with regard to both his capacity for strong drink and driving skills would surely diminish his standing throughout the region. A confrontation with the ditch is, as we realize, of no consequence to the average Norman. But as we also know, Madame Jeanne is not as understanding about his occasional tippling as most wives of hard-working farmers. A little later, and Henri, the tractor, and tow rope have been summoned, and the road is completely blocked with motorists, anxious to observe and advise, if not actually help. They are mostly dispersed by a passing policeman, who arrives on his mobilette to sympathize with Mr. Jean's predicament, make copious notes about the incident, and officially take over arm-waving, traffic directing, and shouting responsibilities. At last the van is parked in our yard, while Mr. Jean, Henri, the village bobby, and two complete strangers settle down in the kitchen to celebrate a successful conclusion to the evening's drama. Donella visits the medicine cabinet for another bottle of emergency calva, and suggests she run Mr. Jean home to ensure that he arrives safely. All the men look at her as if she has just accused them of being vegetarians. A better idea, proposes Mr. Jean, would be for him to drive us all to the Bar Gislaine, where he may properly thank us all for our assistance and relate the story of our adventures to the Jolly Boys Club. In spite of much nodding and general agreement, we politely refuse his invitation. There are at least 2 miles of ditches en route, and besides, we know of Madame Gislaine's general opinion of men drinking, and especially men drinking off the premises. December the 25th, Christmas Day. We rise late and exchange presents. Opening mine, I solve a month-long mystery regarding the contents of the large and strangely shaped parcel beside the decorated fir tree in our orchard. Donella has thoughtfully bought me a new wheelbarrow, complete with a list of pressing outdoor tasks attached by a decorative bow to the handle. She seems equally pleased with her second-hand chainsaw, which I bought from Rene after his assurances that it is as good as when his father bought it 20 years before, and far superior to modern rubbish with all the unnecessary safety devices. Like children impatient to play with our new toys, we decided to spend the day outside. Loading my new wheelbarrow with a picnic, bottle of wine, and the chainsaw, we make our way down to the water meadow so that my wife may give her presents to the livestock. Previously unable to keep our own animals in the past, as mostly absentee landlords, we've sublet the land to a variety of tenants in an attempt to keep the land in trim, and Donella has adopted them all. 2 goats, belonging to our distant neighbour Christian, do good work on the scrub in the 1-acre garden behind the farmhouse, and my wife has bought them a gift-wrapped packet of extra-strength Capstan cigarettes, which are their favourite brand. We learned of this enthusiasm for tobacco from an eccentric Englishman in a neighbouring village who shares his house with an alpine goat. Whilst most amiable, the creature also likes pot plants and isn't house-trained, so even my wife hasn't invited the happy couple to dinner as yet. Apart from the occasional arrival of friend sheep or pigs in need of rough grazing, the 2 sloping and well-drained roadside fields at Le Pouce are reserved for the beef cattle owned by Jean Chevalier, the mayor of Neuilly. We inherited the arrangement from the previous owner and are very glad to have done so. Typical of the farmers in the region, John and his wife Solange have their own fields around their farmhouse in a nearby hamlet, but rent extra grazing land at a very nominal fee. Apart from keeping the land, hedges and gates in impeccable condition, and their tireless efforts in helping us become accepted by the community, having such a close relationship with the local mayor has been of great practical assistance during the restoration of Le Pouce. Every commune in France has its own elected mayor, and each wields considerable power, particularly in matters of planning consent for building works and improvements. It is our particular good fortune that the Chevaliers are tenants at Le Pouce, and such kind and thoughtful people.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that chapter of René and Me, and that you join us again for the next one. See you soon.
René and Me. Written by George East and read by Eugene Fraser.